So, those of you who know Alison, you know how much she has touched a lot of people, enriched a lot of us, and continue to lead change. See? So can you join me to welcome Prof Alison Phipps? On the UNESCO sofa. Donna, where's that thing?
Which thing?
Wai! Mnochka iko!
So Alison, you're going to deliver your keynote sitting on that.
With that.
Just tell them the story. It's cured now.
It's cured.
Yes.
It's cured. So recently, Tawana and myself and Tawana's brother Biggie were in Harare in Zimbabwe doing some work together, and we were taken to the market because it was felt that it was appropriate for us to change the very comfortable cushioned UNESCO sofa into a UNESCO stool. So now I'm going to try and sit on it, but I'm also just looking, are you okay at the back? You're right. You want me to stand about here? There.
No.
There. There.
No.
This bit isn't rehearsed at all. Am I allowed to move from here?
Yes.
Can I walk around? Okay, great. So this is the UNESCO stool, and maybe I will start by sitting on it.
You need a cushion.
No. Let's see if this works. So I want to try and give this wearing something awkward and unusual and that won't fit in my suitcase or cross any borders easily unless they're borders without control. And these are the beautiful freed caged birds of Gaza. And the UNESCO chair works with scholars from Ghana and scholars from Zimbabwe and obviously from Scotland, but also from the Gaza Strip. And I know that Asa and Giovanna and all the team back in Gaza were helping quite a lot of you with the Arabic workshop that we were giving today. And it just feels appropriate given that our colleagues in Gaza can't come. There's yet another letter on the Home Secretary's desk describing yet another set of refusals for yet another set of students and scholars who haven't been able to arrive to be part of the spring school. We keep trying, we keep spending the money, we keep doing it as an act of love and solidarity. But it seems appropriate that in metaphor and physical form, our colleagues are here. So there's some names on here that I think you may know, like Hala and Nazmi and Lubna and others from the Islamic University of Gaza. So when you're not listening to me, you can just watch the birds fly around. And then I'd like to take us back to the very start. And I started with those words of Kareem Polwart. And repetition is a good thing, particularly in art. So I'd like to just take you back and maybe invite you to just close your eyes and listen to the words. And then I'll take you into a little meditation around some of the themes that are in those opening words that inspired our own title and theme for the spring school. In September, the geese snake in across the Firth of Forth from their summer nests in Iceland and the coastal cliffs in Greenland, clattering and honking in ever-shifting steams. My garden is a flight path. I watch, I listen. The outstretched wingtips of each migrating goose create an upwash, a pocket of wind resistance for the geese tucked in, behind and below. These nooks of ease, these aerodynamic sanctuaries, they cut the drag by up to 65%. It's a wonder and also a gale-bitten struggle to sustain cooperation. Every goose takes a turn, stepping up, falling back, labouring and resting. Stepping up, falling back, labouring and resting. Like skyborn socialists, no lone bird bears the brunt. Stepping up, falling back, labouring and resting. It's a gorgeous symbiotic dance. Stepping up, falling back, labouring and resting. So what might it mean to be a goose in a scheme? What might it smell like, taste like? What might it be like to feel the wind in your feathers, that upwash? What might it feel like to have the drag cut by up to 65%? What might it feel like to be up front, stepping up, as a refugee or as a person offering hospitality? What might it be to be up front as the person refusing and closing the borders? What might it be like to labour or to rest from having issued that refusal or issued that acceptance? What might it be like to fall back, to fall back, to fall back, to be the person stuck in waiting? What might it be to be stepping up into art, into languages, falling back as it falls, as it fails, as you tear up the paper, as you stumble over the words? Stepping up, falling back, labouring and resting. Stepping up, falling back, labouring and resting. So if you want to, you can come back into the room. And it's this lovely natural light that we've got in here, because for once I'm not using PowerPoint. And I'd like to keep meditating and thinking with that image of the scheme. It's a really old word, and in the Oxford English Dictionary it has two meanings. The meaning of the scheme, that knot of geese flying together in the sky, is its second meaning, the one that came second in its genesis. We'll come to its first at the end. But I want you to think a little bit about my place in the scheme, and about what it means to be in a fractured scheme, to be taken out of the scheme, to not be in your natural element any longer. And so my family, like many of your families, were also displaced from the land. And whilst in my genealogy there are no migrants, no one has lived overseas, my people are still, my family is still a displaced people. In 1973, the English Enclosure Act was passed. Sometimes it's known as the Great Enclosure Act, which is as funny as Great Britain. And in the 1800s, my maternal family were farmers in a place called Fingal, the head of Wensleydale, one of the dales in Yorkshire in the north of England. Jonathan, my great-great-great-grandfather, died quite suddenly, 10 years after the birth of my great-great-grandfather, James, the youngest. His wife Mary, of course, couldn't inherit the farm. And the local landowner knew that what was happening was that a railway was to be built to bring coal and goods from the colonies into the northwest of England and the northeast of England, and to fuel those factories. And so in my mother's words, and this is an important word, Mary, my great-great-great-grandmother, was fleeced. The railway took the land. Chapel Lane Farm disappeared from the family. For a few years they lived in a small village of East Lytton, tailoring, making silks for the racecourse that the rich landowner held next door. But it wasn't enough to live on. And before they knew it, they were living in Accrington, working in the mills that powered the colonial engines here as displaced peoples themselves. In England, all our folk songs and stories seem to start in the Industrial Revolution. In Scotland, at least, the Gaels have those songs, and the Scots have those songs of the sea. And one day you should ask Ian to sing to you about his grandfather. The songs of the sea, the songs of parting, the songs of the great Scots diaspora that, like the Irish diaspora, you find all over the world. The songs of the people lost to the sea, the songs of the connection to the land. The songs that get found again and brought back to the land, like the step dancing. We don't have those songs. We don't have songs to sing the story. We have to dream it back. Our relationship to the land, our place in the scheme was broken. James left the tiny village in 1880 and he moved to Accrington, an apprentice. And he worked there as a night watchman and as a corporation labourer and as a weaver, and all the women, my great-great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, all of them were weavers in the mills, breathing in the dust and dying young. My grandfather was personnel officer in the factory that made the looms. It was his job in the 1950s to be the first person who welcomed the migrants from the Indian subcontinent who had come over after the war because we'd slaughtered too many people in that war to be able to sustain an economy and to employ them in the mills to keep that engine of empire going. My grandfather was one of the first people that was met by many of the migrant labourers coming over from the Indian subcontinent. And when he died, the streets were lined by many of those to whom he'd offered hospitality. But there's a great irony in that story of him employing the very people who he saw in some ways as being responsible for the displacement of his own family from the land. All the songs are of weaving, all the songs are of factories, all the songs are of the Industrial Revolution. My parents moved and migrated. Migration happened again and again and again and again and again, a constant dislocation through the family. My parents met in Sheffield and stayed there. That's about the most grounded place I know, but I've lived in Glasgow longer than anywhere else. And the songs of Sheffield are the songs of my youth. Be a Sheffield grinder, it is no easy trade. There's more than you'd imagine to the grinding of a blade. The strongest men among us were older than 32. There are few who know such hardships as we poor grinders do. Except there are plenty who know such hardships. Gaza, Harare, Dodua, my family in Khartoum and Keren, and the many, many people living in our city, sleeping in doorways. They know those hardships too. And in her play Wind Resistance, which is really written about the NHS as a place of refuge, particularly focusing on the refuge and sanctuary offered to women in childhood, for me it's impossible not to also hear those other stories of refuge that are in there, around these dislocations and then these attempts that people make to create different sanctuaries and ways of being. The story of my family is the story of dislocation that came about at the same time as the alienation of labour from the land began. And I don't want to romanticise this. It's easy, following a Marxist line, to romanticise the stories of the work, the hard labour on the land. But I do want to think about it from the point of the scheme, of those deep connections to community and family that are about having people alongside you with whom you can step up, fall back, labour and rest. Step up, fall back, labour and rest. And of course my own work continues in a space of what David Graeber has spoken of as alienated labour, where everything I do is expected to be commodified in one way or another, and we're all part of this, every one of us. There is no pure place to stand outside the market. This is where we all are, and where we have to have a precarious and imprecise being. The last 3 days for me have been a little like feasting on chocolate mousse. I'm used to going to a lot of conferences and actually going, I can dip out of that section, or that's when I can fiddle with my slides to get my presentation ready, or I could just phone home in this moment. But actually, over the last 3 days, there's nothing I haven't desperately wanted to attend, unless 2 of my postgrads were actually presenting at the same time, where I've either been running between the rooms or deliberately not attending, because the word Doktormutter in German, the doctor mother, it's something about, well, share or neither of you are getting it. But I also feel a bit like the one who's also been sampling and making that chocolate mousse, because there's something about the executive production role of a spring school a bit like this that also means you're constantly testing to see it's all right. So I've got that slightly queasy feeling that anyone who will have who's been in those roles before. And it hit me particularly hard, and I think a number of us have had what in our team we call a we gracia moment. A moment where the tears reach us, or something just takes us unawares, or we need 5 minutes and a hug with a friend, because something's undone us. And I had mine yesterday, and I had it at a moment where I was just aware of how much work has gone on, how much labour goes in and love goes into the work that everyone's been presenting, and how beautiful that was. And thinking, gosh, this is just, as in Bella's words, stop it guys, this is collective. That there is also another truth behind it, that is about the neoliberal labour that we have performed to enable this to happen. And that for a moment I'm going to actually acknowledge that I have performed to make this happen. So and the moment hit me, and I went outside and I got my calculator out. And anyone who knows me knows I hate numbers. I married an accountant, so I'd never have to touch a spreadsheet again. And Lauren and Bella, when they send me spreadsheets, they look like rainbows, because I know I might be able to just about read them. Red isn't good on a balance sheet. But I started to think about the way in which I've had some say or role in much of the presentations, the 40 different presentations happening. In one way or another, there's been a form to fill in for the PhD scholarships, or for the UNESCO programme, or for the RN Borders programme, or for the New South-South Migration programme, or for any of the small pots of money, because there's always these tiny pots of money we're trying to bring together and make happen. How many text boxes have I filled out? And I started to count that up. And thinking about each form having an average of 34, and here they are. Each form I've filled out having an average of 30 text boxes, usually requiring 4,000 characters, that will have been done around 40 times, and most forms are around 10,000 words long, give or take. Some of them are 100,000 words, some of them are just 1,000 words. So when I add it all up over the last 4 years, just inside text boxes, there are 4 million of my words. And not a single is a line of poetry. Not a single one is a line that I would want Lucy to even subject to blackout poetry. And that's before we even begin the task of reporting in text boxes on how we've spent money. I think I'm in post-traumatic stress, text box stress disorder at the moment. And spaces like this are then the counterpoint to that, and they are the why of that other alienated labour, because they are the attempt to enact what Graeber also calls non-alienated labour. To actually make labour be something that is held and shared in a gift economy relationally. And there has been so much gifting in the room. And the gift economy, whilst the neoliberal economy is well and truly present, is the other story. As Gibson Graham, those wonderful feminist philosophers say, the alternative isn't to come, it's here. And is close to us and is being made by us at the same time as the other truth is there. And I think these theories of alienated labour and non-alienated labour are a place where we can go to, in Corinne Polwarth's words, rest and mend. And the labour in those spaces where our labour is not alienated, where our labour comes back to us as gift, where a company will perform and then they will hear a song sung back to them at the end, where there is a wisdom in the giving and receiving and knowing that the trick, as Anne Carson says, in a gift economy, is always to be putting yourself in debt, not always to be acquiring. That in re-theorising labour and rest in these spaces, which to me are the spaces of a number of social movements par excellence, of Extinction Rebellion, but also of the Refugees Welcome movement. These spaces that Selena's work in Refugee epitomises so well, of the writing of the letter of welcome, and that Uday had as part of the gift just now of his workshop, of the letter written back to people in Glasgow as a thank you. This gift economy that allows us to theorise and change places and step up and fall back and cut that drag by 64%. I spent the day in obedience, unwriting all that has been written, unwalking the beach stream paths, unthinking all that has been thought, unfeeling all sensuous sensation. I let the water lap around my skin, then unlapping let the water join the mist. I held only air. I spoke only with silence, touched only where the shadows lay. I reeled in every prayer, unhooked the bait, threw the fish back into the water. Decreated, I surveyed the battlefield. Warriors are not warriors out with wartime. Warriors are gardeners, poets, spirits of the living at one with the dead. Decreated, I tore the many words from my lips, the many thoughts from my mind, the hopes from my heart. Decreated, I left the dance floor, and for a while, my land had rest from war. The theologian Walter Brueggemann says that the dominant script of society, the one that socialises us all, is a script of therapeutic, technocratic, consumer militarism. He says that script has failed, it cannot make us safe, and it cannot make us happy. It will not integrate us into a whole, and it will not make us whole. And so the task, the hard common task, in the words of the community I'm a member of and close to, founder George MacLeod, the hard common task, which is what we use to make community. Community is formed when we come together around hard common tasks. Is the task for our UNESCO programme, but the task that I believe many of us are engaged in this room, is the task of de-scripting that script, of unravelling it, and then making it into something different. To make it into good work. Yes, some of it alienated because that is our condition, but also some of it unalienated, some of it allowing us to be at rest in labour and to labour in rest. Matthew Fox said that all your work should be play if you've chosen the right work. He lives in California and he's quite well off. The idea of choice is a luxury. And it's a luxury of the global north, and it's held on the backs of many. But if we take that word choice out, there's still something in there about our choices, not so much around our paid work, but around what we choose to do with our time. What we choose to do with our time. And there's a concept in Greek philosophy around the difference between kairos and chronos. Chronos, the time that ticks. The time that when I know that anybody within my team or within the program is watching, the time ticking, the time of the bean counters, the time on the timesheets, when we're looking at that, the time on the deadline to be filed for any piece of work, that time is chronos. And it's deadly, and it saps us. It might give us a wee bit of an adrenaline push to get there, but actually the time that is otherwise understood within the framework of chronos, the framework which is about the creative, as Anne Carson would say, in the widest sense, erotic processes of life, where we make together through connection with one another or connection with other things of this creative world, that is a different thing. That is part of this unalienated labour, and that is where, to use the words of Nadia Bolz-Weber, the work of creation, the work of any maker, of any creator, the work is to make room. She talks about the work of a creator as being making room like the kind-faced lady on the subway who moves her bag so you can sit down. And then perhaps a conversation will happen, or perhaps you'll just rest. But that's the creative work, and that's the work of integration in any direction. One of my favourite poets is the Welsh poet R.S. Thomas, who wrote a lot about the Welsh as a colonised people by the English, and he has a beautiful poem which was given by an amazing man called Simon, who was the first ever openly gay priest with AIDS, who came out and made a television programme about his sickness, and who was a youth worker in the Steam, the housing estate where I lived in Sheffield. It was a very fractured, fractious place. It was a place where it was really almost impossible to walk to his house without being beaten up. It was a place where the suicide rates in the city were going like that among the young people, and the ways in which people would take their lives were extremely gruesome, because that's what alienation does to people as the steelworks close and the livelihoods are taken and nothing good is put in place. And Simon gave me R.S. Thomas's poem when I needed it, when I too was in a place where I could have joined those people who thought that the best possible step they could make in their life was the step off the 18th floor of the tower block in which we lived. The poem's called The Kingdom. I prefer to think of it as a commonwealth of love. It's a long way off, but inside it there are quite different things going on. Festivals, at which the poor man is king and the consumptive healed. Mirrors in which the blind look at themselves and love looks at them back. An industry is for mending the bent bones and minds fractured by life. It's a long way off, but to get there takes no time, and admission is free. If you will purge yourself with desire and prudent yourself with your need only, and the simple offering of your faith and your hope, green as a leaf. For many years, and somewhat incongruously, I did research in tourism studies, like Anna and Angie. And many people said, Alison, you are such a left-wing activist, how on earth could you look at something quite so quintessentially neoliberal, consumptive, and something that we academics as we heard from Angie and Anna yesterday, we never indulge in. And of course, for me, it was a great place to learn about the contradictions and the paradoxes and everything in that phenomenal performance that you two did yesterday, that are at the heart of the neoliberal machine, the neoliberal endeavour, the neoliberal contradictions. And one of the things I got to learn through tourism studies was about the way in which within neoliberal societies, those ancient scheme underpinnings which allowed for rest, the old rituals and festivals of the land, some of them of what we might in some parts call animist traditions, or the ancient traditions, or the pagan traditions, or the land traditions, and others which then got taken up into Christian traditions in the north, but also other traditions around other religions, that these were practices of what's often called Sabbath, of that wisdom within the monotheistic religions, but many others, of taking time to rest, of having it as a rule of life. And in some places, yes, as a codified law, which came then with punishment, but largely as a practice of common life, where the labour is laid down and a different labour is engaged, and it's hard labour of making something that can celebrate the common life. And I learned from tourism research, particularly from Herman Bausinger's work, that actually when we're on holiday, we tend to spend more time attending to the rituals of the body. We tend to spend more time washing, cleansing, eating, sleeping. We tend to turn our worlds upside down. The older we are, the more we want to rejuvenate. The younger we are, the more we want to pass for older. And that these times, these rituals, these patterns, are kind of the vestiges that we have in the holiday times, or the festivals, or the conferences where we gather, of this ancient wisdom of how important it is to come together. And as someone was saying earlier, to break bread and share and talk and know one another and find a way back. It's the opposite of me time or chillaxing. And all the many neoliberal commodifications that come around functions of rest. It's actually usually that the deeper rest, and the resting that many I know have done in the spring school, which has been really hard work, and which leads you to sleep a lot because a lot churns and a lot of emotion comes up, and a lot touches you and your wounds are open again. That work is a different work, it's a deeper work. And it's the work that is the terrain of the deep thinkers, the wisdom makers, the philosophers of time, of kairos and chronos. For me, the image that comes to mind one of the most frequent questions I'm asked is, how do you do it? How do you pack it all in? How do you do all you do? And I have many somewhat self-deprecating, dismissive answers to that question. And they are all the names of people in this room, and there are many, many of you, because it is always a common endeavour and a collective task. But there is also something in there about the wisdom and the rituals of rest and in the importance of them. And I find that I visualise that regularly now as the Celtic knotwork, that strand that weaves itself in and out and is actually never ending, which for me is the path, the journey of labour, of work, that may be alienated or may not be alienated, but which is that journey, but which weaves around space, and that can't make any kind of beautiful pattern. It just otherwise looks like a congealed mess that you can never unravel in wool unless it has that space between it. And so that, for me, is the image of a pathway into labour and rest and how I visualise it. The second most common question I'm asked is, how on earth have you got time to keep an allotment? So Ian Campbell, the answer to the question on your welcome pack, the answer to that question is, what I have planted so far on the allotment is garlic and onions, sturgeon and red baron, and then there are potatoes, there's Cara and Samantha, and there are Maris Piper, and there's Ambo. And Ambo is a beautiful potato with tiny pink eyes. And then there's the lettuce, and then there's the herbs, and then there's the thyme and the spinach, and that's under a little tent. It's all being protected at the moment because our growing season is short in the north. The allotment keeps me. It tells me how I am and who I am and where I am in my life of rest and emotional life particularly. There was a point in my life where I was very, very, very close to quitting academia. And it was bulb planting season in the autumn. And I took some time off and I went up to the allotment and I planted tulips. In the spring they came up in bright, red, angry, regimented rose. It tells me how I was and it tells me how I am now. If I get a letter from the allotment committee, then I know something's wrong. I know I'm not attending to the earth enough. I'm not on my knees on the ground. I'm not actually digging in the humus that makes the soil rich. And that word humus comes from the word humility, which comes from the word human, which is who we are, dust, earth, made of matter. And that if I spend my time on the earth and with the earth, then I have the time and energy to do what I need to do. This time last year, I was pruning the roses. I want to make more time for roses, that they will ramble over my frame and feed on my love of them, that in their budding they will shyly brush my cheek, and in full florid flower they will smother me with scent. That when the storm comes and they bow their heads damp and mouldering earthwards, that they will mingle raindrops with my tears, and there will be salt on their petals and rose water on my skin, until gravity pulls their touch onto my arching, aching body as one with this good, green, groaning, growing earth. At petal fall, as petals fall, as flowers turn to rose hips, rising hips, green-red, reddening into sweetness, entering as rose wine. Matthew Fox asks some other questions about work as rest and rest as work. And I've taken those very much to heart. And those questions are, who does my work serve? But much more importantly, who does it trouble? And alongside this particular spring school, there's been a campaign going on where my phone has been buzzing and ringing because the Home Office, unsurprisingly, have scored an own goal and are needing to be reminded of what their duty is under the law and to grant the due process to an individual. So who does my work serve and who does it trouble? And can I live with integrity to most of my answers to those questions? I won't like all my answers, and I shouldn't, because it's not finished work. And I surround myself in my answers to those questions with good people to whom I can account. Some of them within a community called the Iona community, a group of phenomenal these days, aging men and women, largely in their 70s and 80s, who keep me straight. They are my elders, who in the fractured life that I live as a displaced person, are the people to whom I can turn. Many of you will know Sally. She's often come to our spring school. She's tiring a little at the moment. She's stepping back and resting, and ready for a long, deep rest in the grass. And she is the person I want to be when I grow up. Strong and faithful and answering that question with her life in so many different ways, and then offering her wisdom in so many others. I knit, I garden, I listen to the water flow. There's music, colours. I spend time in water. Sometimes I think that when I'm swimming underwater, the airlessness tells me and gets me closest to what the experience is of those people who choose, and the life that chooses me around the exilic life. And when I come out of the water, if I'm lucky, the sun might dry the droplets on my skin, on her skin, on our skin, on our work. Is this me time? Normally not. Normally it's interrupted again and again. And Brecht and Benjamin wrote a wonderful essay about the importance of interruption, of things just coming and taking you in a different direction. And also the importance in theatre and drama of the pause, the time to stop and stand outside and look at something else. Disobedience. After letting my land rest, I disobeyed. I could do no other. It began with a poem from the place of obedience. The words made the clinging mist blush crimson, the bark in the forest burn red like cedar, scented as richly and scalping the skin. The ink smudged, the wax melted, the carpet of leaves was moist, the fish swam back onto the hook, onto the fire, and into the poem's wide, wild mouth. There's a second meaning of the word scheme. And it's an important meaning, it's an old meaning. And it means a hank of wool, wrapped and held loosely, possibly in a knot. On the 18th of May, Etty Hillesum, in 1942, not this year, obviously. On the 18th of May, 1942, Etty Hillesum wrote these words. The threat grows ever greater, and terror increases from day to day. I draw prayer around me like a dark, protective wall, withdraw inside it as one might into a convent cell, and then step outside again, calmer and stronger and more collected again. I can imagine times to come when I shall stay on my knees for days on end, waiting until the protective walls are strong enough to prevent my going to pieces altogether, my being lost and utterly devastated. In the gift economy that seems to be part of the work of this school, this came to me with these words. For Alison, who bears with the loving, bearing witness to beauty and grief. It's called an interrupted life. It's a little like Kareem saying, I fear for the weather to come, and we're not going to make it alone. Because this time in our history, I believe, is another time, perhaps what some might call a kairos moment, a time of constellation, a time when certainties have unravelled, and we might characterise much of what we're experiencing as a kind of wartime. It doesn't really reach us that much this high up in the north, but the bodies are there, piling up. And as we were hearing in the presentation that Ross gave us, 85% of all displaced peoples are in the global south. You don't have to be good, says Mary Oliver. You don't have to walk on your knees for hundreds of miles through the desert repenting. And when I hear those words, which work for me as poetry does, like a little mantra, holding, touching, being strong enough to enter my intellect, as R.S. Thomas would say, by way of my heart. When I hear those words, I remember that the rest of labour, the continuing not work, is the well for which we come, and it can still me and steady me. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I'll tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies, and the deep trees and mountains and rivers. Around my neck is a piece of kumano. I'm just catching the eyes of our Aotearoa New Zealanders. It was given to me after I'd given a keynote 10 years ago. And at the end of the keynote, there was complete silence, and I wondered what on earth I had done. And then suddenly the Maori in the room stood up and sang. They sang back to me. They sang what I believe is called a karakia. And afterwards explained to me that when a truth is said within Maori tradition, then your breath leaves you, and it has to be returned. And the return comes in song. Round my neck are beads. Round my neck is a piece of bogwood, 4,000 years old. It's a tree, and inside it is marble from Iona. It's some of the oldest rock in the world, next to some of the youngest rock in the world. Talisman, touchstones, things we can hold when we can't hold things any longer. Because meanwhile, the wild goose are high in the clean blue air and are heading home again. And however you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Or as Kareem might translate this, like skyborn socialists, no lone bird bears the brunt. It's a gorgeous symbiotic dance, stepping up, falling back, labouring and resting. But I fear for the weather to come, and we're not going to make it alone. The second meaning of the word scheme is that flock of wild geese or swans in flight, typically in a V formation. But the first one is this scheme. This scheme which connects me to my great-great-grandmother and my great-grandmother and my grandmother and my mother who tells me the story. This scheme that we dream back in our own ways. A length of thread or yarn, loosely coiled and knotted. And so I think of them, my weaving grandmother and my great-great-great-grandmother, fleeced, as my mother puts it, by the compulsory purchase order for the railway line to the market town of Falls. And I sit, and everywhere I travel, I knit. And as we travel and gather people together, like this, to make and to mourn and to dance and delight, my knitting goes with me, weaving in the story. There's a tradition on the Pacific Islands that whenever elders gather, there should always be a woman weaving the narrative, weaving the story. And as Tim Ingold, the anthropologist, says, the word for text comes from textare, which of course is textile, which meant originally not so much to write, but to weave. So as we travel, my knitting goes with me, and so do these skeins of wool. Often the loose ones, knotted, and there'll be a stranger sitting next to me on a plane who offers his or her 2 arms for me to weave and unravel and wind the wool. Strangers on planes and trains, in guest rooms, even under baobab trees and by rivers. And this is another one. This one is the brainchild of my colleague Lynn Abrams. And Lynn works on the weavers in Shetland, the people, and particularly the women who did the weaving of the Shetland wool, but also who created those beautiful patterns of Shetland lacework. And like me, Lynn is a professor who loves to knit. And Lynn had the genius idea when she discovered that the University of Glasgow has sheep, of using those sheep to spin wool and to create steams. And to begin a whole new unravelling of work around that. When we travel as a team and we do our working groups, one of the things we like to say is that we're all connected up, that we're all part of something that has been made together. And we learnt this through work with the Iona community at the head of the Camus track. Campus, and many of you have been there with GrandNet. Campus is an outdoor centre for young people, often people with troubled histories and backgrounds and fracturings like those I've presented perhaps of my own youth and my own family. And it's off-grid, so you can have a warm shower, but this is the Ross of Mull and their solar panels that heat the water. So you can imagine how often the water is hot. And the young people come up to the head of the track at the end of their time there, or anyone who stayed as a guest, and form a circle. And they form a circle. And what we say to them is, this gathering has happened this time. It can only happen at this moment in time. This moment in history will not repeat itself. We will never all be gathered in a room like this again in the same way. But we make a circle and we stand together and we take the wool and we begin to unwind it. And what I'd like to do is just invite you into this circle. You might have to move your chair a little bit. Despite all the dislocations, there's a moment where we can cut the drag by up to 65%. Maybe cut the text boxes by several million. So what I'd like you to do is break the wall between your partners on either side, and then turn on either side, it doesn't matter which way, and help people just tie a little friendship bracelet around their wrist. And you'll see I have quite a knotted wall on my wrist, which represents the young people of Zimbabwe and the young people of Ghana and the young people of Camas and many other places.
I'm gonna bring it with her, and then we're just gonna tie it
So you just put it on
It's fine.
It's the bean to smell like
So, thank you everybody for coming to the Spring School, for being part of this creative adventure. This was just the second. You can see the recycled balloons. It did say 20. But there are 2 double zeros left in the school, which is somehow symbolically algorithmic. Thank you so much to all of you for coming and for being part of it, for forming this circle and for sharing so generously, and often making yourselves quite vulnerable in the process of doing that, and for helping us try and see how we rethink and redo and remake art and academic and activist work around this wartime and work it into a peacetime and a justice time. I particularly at this moment want to thank all of the team that I work with, who are absolutely incredible. Lauren and Bella and Gamali and Tawana and Nadinsa and Emily and Giovanna, where is she like? They're astonishingly generous people to work with, and as you can imagine, working with me is not the easiest of things to do, and there are many times and there are many times when I'll role play say no to Alison when another crazy idea comes up. But I hope you've enjoyed as much as we have the hospitality of this place at Heart of Scotstoun and the work we've been doing. And can I ask you all to just give a huge round of applause to Bella in particular, who's produced this. But also, there's lots of people working behind the scenes, as well as Tawana and Ganwi and Giovanna and Nadinsa, and the many people who, last year, Rasul, who gave one of the keynotes, described as Alison's army of PhD students. But actually, Kukia, who've done all the cooking and the food and the catering, and also the people at Heart of Scotstoun. We've not been here before, but they couldn't have been more welcoming. And then Christian, who brought the welcome hut with Susie. So if we could just give them all a huge round of applause. You'll consider maybe coming again if we do this again next year. I'm playing, my team don't know this yet, with the idea of also maybe doing a residential at some point. I can see the real value of people being able to come and go and bring their children and drop in the way you've done, but maybe going away and seeing each other in our pyjamas and telling stories by an open fire. That might also, on the canvas with no warm showers might be something that's
We need the school education to be 30.
So thank you so much for coming. Do write your feedback on the baobab leaves, and yeah, I'm just going to shut up.
What normally happens is that we forget to thank those who are thanking everybody. So, can you join us, all those whom Alison has thanked, to thank her so much for bringing us together and making everything that's happening on the sofa, the UNESCO sofa, happen. Last thing before we go, I've been asked to call on Selena to explain to us what we are supposed to do on our bed sheets.
You can't make me follow all of that. There's some paper on your seats. We pass on messages of welcome, and this room is so full of energy and positivity and loveliness. I would love to pass on some of your welcomes to people who have just arrived in Glasgow. It can be a picture, it can be a few words, it can be your full thought process. Sometimes they're 6 or 7 pages long. It depends how much time you want to give, but we would love to pass on some of the words from today as welcome messages to people most recently arrived in the city.
Hopefully we'll see you all again next year, and we hope you would tell your colleagues, your friends, your family, and encourage them to come and participate as well. Thank you all very much. See you next year.